A black CEO gets kicked out of first class, humiliated in front of silent passengers with no one daring to speak up. Just 3 minutes later, the airline begins to crumble. Systems fail, flights are grounded, and stock prices plunge. Everyone thinks it's a random tech glitch until the truth surfaces. Because this CEO wasn't just a passenger, he was the hidden force behind the company itself. And what no one knew is that he'd been waiting for this exact moment for years. What did they do to him in the past, and how far did he go to make sure they'd never forget it? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. The early morning sun cast long shadows across JFK Airport's Terminal 7 as Darius Cole made his way through the quiet corridors. His gray hoodie, a deliberate choice of comfort over flash, hung loosely on his tall frame. The soft cushioning of his noise-canceling headphones created a peaceful bubble around him, muffling the occasional announcements echoing through the terminal. His black backpack containing everything he needed for his London trip was slung over one shoulder. No flashy luggage, no unnecessary items, just the essentials, precisely packed. The terminal's fluorescent lights reflected off the polished floors as his shoes moved silently across them. At the check-in counter, Darius pulled down his headphones to rest around his neck. The agent's eyes flickered briefly between his passport photo and his face, then to his first-class ticket. Her expression shifted subtly, that familiar look of surprise he'd seen countless times before. "Good morning, Mr. Cole," she said, her tone professional but uncertain. "Checking in for the London flight?" Darius nodded, offering a slight smile. "Yes, please." The process was quick and efficient. He declined the invitation to the VIP lounge with a polite shake of his head. The less time spent in confined spaces with people who'd stare at him, the better. Instead, he headed straight for Gate 12, where his flight would depart. The gate area was beginning to fill with the usual morning crowd. Business travelers in pressed suits, families corralling sleepy children, and other passengers settling in for the wait. As Darius found a quiet spot near the window, he noticed the subtle reactions of other first-class passengers. A woman in an expensive blazer clutched her handbag closer. A man in a pinstriped suit glanced up from his laptop, then quickly looked away. Darius had learned to read these micro-expressions years ago. They were as familiar to him as computer code, and just as predictable. He kept his posture relaxed, his movements deliberate and calm. His headphones remained around his neck. Experience had taught him that appearing too closed off only increased others' suspicion. When boarding time approached, he waited patiently as the gate agent called for first-class passengers. As he stepped forward, her eyes narrowed slightly. "Your ID and boarding pass, please?" she asked, despite having already scanned his documents during check-in. Darius produced them without comment. The agent studied his passport with unnecessary thoroughness, comparing the photo to his face multiple times. Finally, she handed them back with a tight smile. "Thank you, Mr. Cole. Have a good flight." The aircraft interior welcomed him with the subtle scent of new leather and recycled air. Darius moved efficiently to his seat in 2A, storing his backpack in the overhead compartment with practiced ease. The window seat offered both view and privacy, a calculated choice he always made when booking flights. As he settled into the wide first-class seat, he noticed a flight attendant watching him from the galley. Her name tag read Rebecca, and her smile didn't reach her eyes. Darius turned his attention to the window, watching the ground crew move about their morning duties. The cabin gradually filled with other first-class passengers. A white couple in their 50s approached his row, pausing in the aisle. The woman's perfume was expensive and overwhelming, her jewelry catching the cabin lights as she nudged her husband. "Did security even check everyone today?" the man said loudly, not bothering to lower his voice. His wife's lips pressed into a thin line as she glanced at Darius. Darius kept his gaze fixed on the window, his expression neutral. He'd built a tech empire from nothing, revolutionized entire industries, but moments like these still occurred with depressing regularity. He let the comment wash over him like background noise. The couple moved to their seats, but their presence seemed to trigger something. Footsteps approached, and a shadow fell across his seat. Darius looked up to find Rebecca, the flight attendant, standing over him. Her posture was rigid, her smile strained. "Sir, I need to see your boarding pass again," she said, her voice carrying a hint of authority that seemed forced. Darius studied her face for a moment, noting the tension around her eyes, the slight tremor in her extended hand. Without a word, he reached into his pocket and retrieved his boarding pass, holding it out to her. Rebecca took the document, but Darius noticed she barely glanced at it. Her decision had already been made before she'd approached him. "This seat isn't assigned to you," she announced loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "Please come with me." The cabin grew quiet. Darius could feel the eyes of other passengers on him, some curious, others satisfied. He rose slowly from his seat, his movements calm and controlled. His face remained impassive as he stood to his full height, saying nothing. The silence spoke volumes. Rebecca gestured for Darius to follow her down the aisle, her movements clipped and efficient. The first-class cabin had fallen into an uncomfortable silence, broken only by the soft hum of the aircraft's ventilation system. As they passed row after row of premium seats, passengers suddenly found their magazines fascinating or pretended to be absorbed in their phones. Some even closed their eyes, feigning sleep to avoid witnessing the scene unfolding before them. The white couple who had made the security comment earlier exchanged knowing glances, their satisfaction poorly concealed behind raised newspapers. The woman's diamond rings caught the overhead lights as she adjusted her reading material, a small smirk playing at the corners of her mouth. Rebecca maintained her professional demeanor, but there was an unmistakable coldness in her stance. She didn't look back at Darius as she led him through the business class section and into the economy cabin. Her heels clicked against the floor with sharp, decisive steps. Near the galley between cabins, Lisa Monroe stood frozen, watching the procession. Her dark hands gripped a stack of magazines so tightly her knuckles had gone pale. She'd seen this scene play out before, too many times to count. Her throat felt tight as Darius passed her, his dignity intact despite the humiliation being forced upon him. Their eyes met briefly, and in that moment, Lisa felt the familiar weight of shame settle in her stomach. She looked away first. The economy cabin was a stark contrast to the spacious luxury of first class. The seats were packed tightly together, the aisle narrow and cramped. A baby's cry pierced the air from somewhere in the back, followed by the gentle shushing of its mother. The overhead bins bulged with oversized carry-ons, and the air felt thicker, more confined. Rebecca stopped at an empty middle seat in row 32. "This will be your seat for the flight," she said, her voice carrying no trace of apology or warmth. She didn't wait for a response before turning on her heel and heading back toward the front of the plane, leaving Darius standing in the narrow aisle. Without a word, Darius stored his backpack in the overhead compartment and settled into the middle seat. His knees pressed against the seat in front of him, but his face remained impassive. To his left, a young woman in business casual attire glanced at him, then did a double-take. Her eyes widened slightly in recognition. She mouthed his name, Darius Cole, but didn't speak it aloud. She knew who he was, knew what he had built, but seemed to understand this wasn't the moment for conversation. Instead, she gave him a small, sympathetic nod before returning to her book. The cabin air felt heavy with the recycled breath of hundreds of passengers. The crying baby had settled into hiccuping sobs, and somewhere behind them, a child was asking their parent why the plane hadn't taken off yet. Darius reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, the latest model, with a matte black finish that absorbed the harsh cabin lighting. His movements were unhurried as he pressed his thumb to the fingerprint reader. The screen came to life, displaying a secure messaging app with an interface few would recognize. The app required both biometric authentication and a complex password, but Darius's fingers moved across the keyboard with practiced ease. In the message field, he typed a single word, execute. The word sat there for a moment, stark black against the white background, before he pressed send. The message disappeared into the encrypted network, leaving no trace of its existence. Darius closed the app and powered down his phone, sliding it back into his pocket with the same careful movements that characterized everything he did. Leaning back in his seat, he closed his eyes. The cabin's atmosphere shifted as the aircraft began to move, a subtle vibration running through the floor. A gentle rumble of turbulence shook the plane, causing several passengers to grip their armrests more tightly. Up in first class, Rebecca had resumed her duties as if nothing unusual had occurred. She moved through the cabin with practiced efficiency, her smile now warm and engaging as she greeted the remaining passengers. "Can I get you a pre-flight drink?" she asked the couple who had made the security comment. "Perhaps some champagne to start your journey?" The woman nodded enthusiastically, her jewelry jingling as she gestured. "That would be lovely. Thank you." Outside the windows, the terminal building began to slide past as the aircraft pushed back from the gate. The engines hummed louder, their power building as the plane began its taxi toward the runway. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom announcing their departure, while flight attendants moved through their final checks. The plane turned onto the taxiway, its wheels rumbling over the seams in the concrete. In his economy seat, Darius remained still, his eyes closed, his breathing steady and controlled. The passenger next to him snuck another glance in his direction, then returned to her book, leaving him to his thoughts as the aircraft made its way toward takeoff. The plane cruised at 35,000 feet, its engines humming a steady rhythm against the backdrop of clear blue skies. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere had settled into the familiar routine of a long-haul flight. Flight attendants moved efficiently through the aisles, serving drinks and responding to call buttons with practiced ease. In first class, Rebecca leaned over seat 2A, now occupied by a middle-aged white man in an expensive suit, as she carefully poured champagne into a crystal flute. Her laughter tinkled through the cabin as the passenger made a joke about airline food. "Oh, Mr. Peterson, you're terrible," she said, her smile wide and genuine. "But I promise the meal service today will exceed your expectations." She topped off his glass with an extra splash, the kind of personal touch she reserved for certain passengers. Throughout the cabin, passengers were absorbed in their personal entertainment screens. Some watched the latest blockbusters, while others tracked their flight progress on the moving map display. The soft glow of dozens of screens illuminated faces in the dimmed cabin lighting. The peaceful routine of the flight was interrupted by a small sound, a quiet beep, followed by several screens flickering. A businessman in 4C tapped his screen repeatedly, frowning when the menu failed to respond. In row 7, a teenager called out to her mother, "Mom, my movie just stopped." More screens began to freeze. The moving map disappeared, replaced by a loading symbol that spun endlessly. A flight attendant picked up the cabin intercom handset to make an announcement, but only static emerged from the speakers before cutting out completely. The cockpit door opened and the captain's voice came through, calm but carrying a note of concern. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a minor technical issue with our entertainment system. Our crew is working to resolve this. We appreciate your patience." What the passengers couldn't see was the growing chaos unfolding on the ground. At Heathrow Airport in London, gate agents stared at blank screens where flight information should be displayed. In Singapore, a fully loaded aircraft sat at the gate, unable to receive clearance because the airline's scheduling system had gone dark. At Frankfurt International, baggage handlers stood idle beside motionless carousels, their scanning devices unable to connect to the central system. In Manhattan, at the airline's gleaming headquarters, red warning lights began flashing across monitoring screens in the IT department. A young systems administrator's eyes widened as she watched error messages cascade across her display. "Sir," she called out to her supervisor, "we're losing servers, all of them." The CTO, a man named James Morrison, rushed over to her station. His face paled as he watched the diagnostic readings. "This isn't a malfunction," he muttered, fingers flying across the keyboard. "This is coordinated. Get me a secure line to cybersecurity now." Back on the aircraft, passengers began to notice something was wrong. A woman in business class pulled out her tablet, attempting to connect to the in-flight Wi-Fi. Nothing loaded. Behind her, a stock trader refreshed his phone repeatedly, watching with growing alarm as the airline's stock ticker finally updated. "Holy shit," he whispered, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "The stock is in free fall." The news spread through the cabin in hushed whispers. Passengers pulled out phones and tablets, checking financial apps and news sites. The airline's share price was dropping at an unprecedented rate, triggering circuit breakers and drawing immediate attention from financial analysts. In economy class, Darius sat quietly, his eyes now open. He watched the chaos unfold with the calm demeanor of someone who had anticipated every detail of this moment. His seatmate, the woman who had recognized him earlier, was now staring at her phone in disbelief, occasionally glancing at him with a mixture of realization and awe. Lisa Monroe passed through the aisle carrying a tray of water cups. As she passed Darius's row, their eyes met briefly. There was something in his gaze, not triumph or anger, but a quiet certainty, that made her quickly look away. She hurried past, her hands trembling slightly as she continued her service. At the front of the plane, Rebecca was becoming frustrated with the malfunctioning systems. She jabbed at the flight attendant panel repeatedly, trying to reset the entertainment system. "I hate tech crap," she muttered to another flight attendant, unaware that her world was about to change dramatically. "Why can't things just work like they're supposed to?" Meanwhile, in a private dining room at Le Bernardin in Manhattan, Stephen Clark, the airline's CEO, was cutting into a perfectly cooked Wagyu steak when his phone buzzed. He ignored it. It buzzed again and again. Finally, his dinner companion, a board member, checked his own phone and went pale. "Stephen," the board member said urgently, "we need to go, now." Clark's fork clattered against his plate as he read the cascade of messages on his screen. His face, usually carefully composed for the public eye, showed genuine fear for the first time in years. Minutes later, Clark burst into the airline's executive boardroom, his tie loosened and dinner jacket askew. The room was already filled with grim-faced executives and technical staff. Multiple screens displayed real-time data, or rather, the absence of it. The airline's entire digital infrastructure was going dark, piece by piece. "Someone tell me what the hell is happening to my airline," Clark demanded. But the room's silence told him what he already knew. Something was very, very wrong. Stephen Clark burst through the double doors of the executive boardroom, his expensive silk tie hanging loose and his face flushed from running. Sweat beaded at his temples, staining the collar of his custom-tailored shirt. The normally pristine room, with its polished mahogany table and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan, had transformed into a scene of barely controlled chaos. Dozens of monitors lined the walls, each displaying a different aspect of the airline's operations. Red warning messages flashed across nearly every screen, blinking urgently like digital heartbeats in distress. Terminal status indicators blinked from green to yellow to red in rapid succession, marking the collapse of their global network. The global route map, usually a web of bright connection lines spanning continents, was going dark region by region as if someone were slowly turning off the lights across the world. "Someone better have answers," Clark demanded, his voice sharp with barely contained panic. His eyes darted from screen to screen, taking in the disaster unfolding before him. His fingers trembled slightly as he gripped the back of a leather chair. The CTO, James Morrison, stood at the head of the table, surrounded by scattered laptops and tablets. Sweat beaded on his forehead as his fingers flew across a keyboard. Papers with hastily scribbled notes littered the space around him. He looked up at Clark, his face ashen, eyes wide with fear. "Sir," Morrison began, his voice trembling slightly. "We've been running diagnostics for the past hour. It's not a hack. It's not malware. It's—" He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. "It's not external. We're being shut down from within." Clark slammed his hand on the table, making coffee cups rattle and several junior executives jump. "What does that even mean? How can we be shutting ourselves down?" High above the Atlantic, the atmosphere in the aircraft cabin had grown tense. Passengers whispered among themselves. Nervous glances exchanged across the aisle. Phones and tablets held uselessly in their hands as they tried repeatedly to connect to the now dead Wi-Fi. The cabin lights flickered occasionally, adding to the growing anxiety. A young mother in row 23 bounced her crying toddler on her knee, trying to distract him with a tablet that no longer played his favorite cartoons. Her hushed reassurances were drowned out by the child's wails. In his seat near the back, Darius Cole quietly opened his laptop. The screen cast a soft blue glow on his calm features. The display showed a complex dashboard of code execution logs and system status indicators, rows of green check marks steadily replacing red error messages. Each line represented another piece of the airline's infrastructure being methodically disconnected. He studied it for a moment, his expression unchanged, then closed the laptop with a soft click. Lisa Monroe moved through the aisle with her water cart, her movements mechanical as she tried to maintain a sense of normalcy. Her practiced smile didn't reach her worried eyes. She reached Darius's row, holding out a plastic cup of water without meeting his eyes. He accepted it with a slight nod, never speaking a word. Their fingers brushed momentarily, but neither acknowledged the contact. The crying child a few rows ahead grew louder, and Lisa hurried forward to offer assistance, grateful for the distraction. Back in the boardroom, the tension had reached a breaking point. Technical staff huddled around computers, speaking in urgent whispers. Executive board members paced the room, making frantic phone calls that went nowhere. The sound of nervous fingers tapping on keyboards filled the air. Anya Sharma, the youngest board member and head of legal compliance, sat slightly apart from the others. Her dark hair was pulled back in a tight bun, her expression focused and intense. Her fingers moved swiftly across her laptop as she dug through system logs looking for patterns. Something about the shutdown sequence seemed familiar, triggering a memory she couldn't quite place. Her eyes caught on a recurring string in the root directories, /cw-vault/. She froze, her breath catching in her throat, her mind racing back to last year's major cloud infrastructure transition. The consulting firm that had handled it, Coalworks. They had seemed almost too good, too efficient, understanding the airline systems better than their own IT department. She remembered the quiet, intense man who had led the project, how Clark had barely acknowledged him in meetings. The color drained from her face as connections began forming in her mind. She looked up at the chaos around her, seeing it with new understanding. The boardroom door burst open again. The CFO, Robert Martinez, rushed in clutching a thick folder of legal documents. His usually immaculate appearance was disheveled, his reading glasses askew on his nose, his normally confident demeanor replaced by naked fear. "The stock," he gasped, dropping the folder on the table with a heavy thud. "We've hit a historic low. Trading has been halted twice already." He spread out several papers with trembling hands, pointing to highlighted sections. "But that's not the worst part. Look at this. It's from last year's consulting contract with Coalworks." The executives gathered around as Martinez pointed to a seemingly innocuous confidentiality clause. Buried within the dense legal text was something called Clause Delta, nearly invisible among paragraphs of standard contract language. "It's an override condition," Martinez explained, his voice shaking. "If Coalworks detects a breach of ethical or racial conduct in the airline's operations, it activates Clause Delta. They built it right into our systems when they did the transition, and we signed off on it. We all signed it without reading the fine print." Stephen Clark's face turned an even deeper shade of red, veins bulging at his temples. "Who the hell is behind Coalworks?" he demanded, looking around the room wildly, searching for someone to blame. "Who did this to us?" Anya stood slowly, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Darius Cole," she said, watching recognition dawn on Clark's face like a slow, terrible sunrise. "Coalworks is Darius Cole." 35,000 feet above the Atlantic, Darius sat quietly in his economy-class seat. Through the small window, the sun was beginning to set, painting the clouds in brilliant shades of orange and purple. His reflection in the window remained calm, almost serene, as the last rays of daylight stretched across the endless horizon. In his hand, he held the plastic cup of water, untouched, watching as tiny bubbles rose to the surface and disappeared. 5 hours into the transatlantic flight, the atmosphere inside the aircraft had shifted from mild discomfort to palpable tension. The cabin lights had been dimmed to a soft glow, but few passengers were sleeping. Instead, the blue glow of phone screens illuminated worried faces throughout the cabin as passengers desperately refreshed their devices, searching for updates, their fingers tapping with increasing urgency. A businessman in row 15 leaned across the aisle to show his colleague his phone screen, his forehead creased with concern. "Look at this. The entire Airline app is down. Can't even check my miles." His whispered voice carried more worry than the trivial complaint warranted, a tremor betraying deeper anxieties. 2 rows ahead, a young woman scrolled through Twitter, her face bathed in the harsh light of her screen, eyes widening with each swipe. The trending section was dominated by hashtags. #system crash and #fly high fall hard led the list. She tapped through tweets showing screenshots of error messages, stock charts with dramatic downward slopes, and growing speculation about the cause. Her finger paused occasionally, hovering over particularly alarming posts before continuing its nervous journey. In his seat near the back of the plane, Darius Cole sat perfectly still, a worn paperback novel open in his hands. The book was Asimov's Foundation, a story about the calculated collapse of an empire. His eyes moved steadily across the pages, his expression as calm as if he were reading in his own living room, rather than on an aircraft in crisis. Not a single muscle in his face betrayed any emotion as the chaos unfolded around him. The finance analyst seated next to him had been fidgeting for the past hour, stealing glances at his seatmate while pretending to work on spreadsheets on his laptop. His leg bounced nervously against the floor. Finally, he couldn't contain himself any longer. Leaning slightly closer, he whispered, "You're Cole. Darius Cole, right?" Darius looked up from his book, meeting the man's eyes with a measured gaze that seemed to look straight through him. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod before returning to his reading, the pages turning with deliberate precision. The analyst's nervous laugh was barely audible, more a release of tension than genuine amusement. "Jesus, is this you?" he asked, gesturing vaguely at his laptop screen where financial news headlines screamed about the airline's plummeting stock price, the red numbers flashing like warning signals. Darius turned another page in his book, offering no response. His silence seemed to fill the space between them, making the analyst shift uncomfortably in his seat, the leather squeaking beneath him as he retreated into his own thoughts. Up in the first-class cabin, Rebecca Whitman stood in the galley, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against her tablet screen, each tap more forceful than necessary. A message from a passenger in 1D glowed on the display. "Our flight is now grounded for connecting flights. Stock is crashing. You seeing this?" She frowned, her lips pressing into a thin line, the confidence that usually radiated from her posture noticeably diminished. The tablet trembled slightly in her hands as she read more messages flooding in from various passengers. Each one carried more alarming news about the airline. Her airline. The company she'd defended countless times, whose procedures she'd followed religiously, whose authority she'd wielded like a shield against those she deemed unworthy. Rebecca walked up the aisle of first class, her steps less confident than usual, her usual proud stride reduced to an uncertain gait. The same passengers who had nodded approvingly when she'd removed Darius now avoided her gaze, their attention fixed firmly on their devices or the darkened windows, as if she had suddenly become invisible. In the rear galley, Lisa Monroe mechanically arranged drinks on her cart, her movements automatic after years of service. The ice cubes clinked against plastic cups, a sound that usually faded into the background of her workday. Today, each clink seemed to echo with accusation, a tiny reminder of her complicity. Her smartwatch vibrated against her wrist, the gentle buzz feeling like an electric shock. She glanced down to see a message from her cousin. "Isn't this the airline you work for? They're calling out racism on the news." The words seemed to burn into her skin. Lisa's hands froze mid-motion, a bottle of ginger ale suspended above the cart like time itself had stopped. The message on her watch blurred as tears threatened to form in her eyes, stinging with shame and recognition. She blinked them back quickly, professional training taking over. But the shame that washed over her couldn't be dismissed so easily, settling deep in her chest like a physical weight. Her mind replayed the scene from earlier, Darius being escorted from first class, his dignity intact while others lost theirs. She had stood by, silent, her mouth dry and words trapped in her throat. Just as she had stood by so many times before, watching similar scenes play out with different faces. The weight of years of quiet complicity pressed down on her shoulders, heavier than any luggage she'd ever helped store. A few rows ahead, Darius's phone screen lit up with a new notification, casting a brief glow on his composed features. He marked his place in the book with a thin bookmark and picked up the device with unhurried movements. The message was brief but significant. Stage 2 complete. Media seeding triggered. 6 words that represented years of careful planning. He allowed himself a moment to absorb this information, his expression unchanged, not even a flicker of satisfaction crossing his face. Around him, passengers continued to murmur and worry, unaware that they were flying through the eye of a storm that had been years in the making. Some tapped frantically at their phones, trying to rebook connecting flights that no longer existed in the system. Others watched the airline's stock price continue its historic plummet, their investments evaporating with each passing minute, their faces growing paler with every refresh. The same technology that had once made him invisible, the systems he had mastered while others underestimated him, was now systematically dismantling an empire built on casual cruelty and institutionalized bias. He returned the phone to his pocket and reopened his book, rejoining Hari Seldon's mathematical prediction of inevitable change, a small, almost imperceptible curve touching the corner of his mouth. In the Manhattan headquarters of the airline, the executive boardroom had transformed from a symbol of corporate power into a scene of barely contained panic. The mahogany table that usually hosted careful deliberations now bore the scattered remains of hastily ordered takeout and empty coffee cups. Screens mounted on the walls displayed a cascade of red indicators and error messages, their glow casting an apocalyptic tinge over the faces of the gathered executives. Stephen Clark stood at the head of the table, his perfectly tailored suit jacket discarded, his blue silk tie loosened. His face had taken on a dangerous shade of red as he leaned forward, both hands planted firmly on the table's surface. "I don't care what you have to do," he shouted at the CTO, who sat hunched over his laptop, fingers flying across the keyboard. "Shut it down. Shut everything down and restart if you have to. This is our system." The CTO, a man who usually projected confidence in technical matters, looked up with defeat written across his features. Sweat beaded on his forehead, and dark patches had formed under the arms of his white shirt. "You don't understand," he said, his voice cracking. "We don't own them anymore. Legally, we handed control to Coalworks during migration." "What the hell are you talking about?" Stephen's fist came down hard on the table, causing several water glasses to jump. "We paid millions for these systems." In the corner of the room, Anya sat quietly at her laptop, her dark eyes scanning through document after document. Her fingers moved with purpose, searching through archived contracts and legal agreements. Years of experience in corporate governance had taught her to look for the fine print, the buried clauses that everyone else overlooked. "Sir," she called out, her voice cutting through the chaos. "I found something." The room fell silent as she stood, straightening her charcoal gray blazer. She walked to the main screen and connected her laptop, projecting a section of legal text for everyone to see. "It's in the migration contract," she explained, her voice steady despite the tension in the room. "Section 7, subsection D, what they called Clause Delta. It states, if the client is found to have violated racial equality standards by internal investigation or external proof, the system may be forcefully revoked." Stephen Clark's face drained of color as he read the words. "That's impossible," he whispered, but the strength had gone out of his voice. "It's not only possible," Anya continued, switching to another document. "It's legally binding. We signed this. All of us did. Mr. Cole didn't just plan this. He orchestrated it completely within the bounds of the law." The CFO, who had been frantically taking calls in the corner, suddenly looked up from his phone. "It's getting worse," he announced. "The press has something." As if on cue, phones around the room began buzzing with notifications. Major news outlets were beginning to publish stories, complete with leaked internal documents showing years of racial bias incidents that had been systematically downplayed or ignored by management. "Look at these timestamps," the head of PR said, her voice hollow. "These reports go back years. Complaints filed and dismissed. Incidents swept under the rug, all documented, all preserved. Stephen Clark sank into his chair, his empire crumbling in real time. How? He managed to ask. How did he get all this? He didn't have to get anything, Anya replied, her voice carrying a hint of something that might have been satisfaction. We gave him everything when we hired Coalworks to manage our data migration. We literally handed him the keys to our kingdom. 35,000 feet above the Atlantic, the aircraft continued its journey through darkening skies. Lisa Monroe walked slowly down the aisle, her movements deliberate, her mind racing with the implications of everything she was seeing on social media. Years of trained composure couldn't completely hide the tremor in her hands as she approached row 47. She paused beside Darius's seat, watching him read for a moment. The same man who had been escorted to the back of the plane hours ago now seemed to radiate a quiet power. The cabin lights reflected off his reading glasses as he turned another page. "You knew this was going to happen," she said in a low voice, barely above a whisper. Darius looked up from his book, meeting her eyes directly for the first time. His expression was neither triumphant nor angry, just calm, certain. "I gave them every chance," he replied softly. His words meant only for her. "They chose this." The simple statement carried the weight of years. Years of dismissed complaints, of misunderstandings, of procedures followed that should have been questioned. Lisa felt that weight settle on her shoulders as she thought of all the times she had stayed silent. Near the front of the aircraft, Rebecca Whitman walked briskly toward the cockpit, her shoes clicking against the floor. She carried her tablet, intending to update the flight crew about the growing situation. Her perfectly maintained appearance and practiced smile remained in place, even as notifications continued to light up her device. She was still unaware that her name was already spreading across social media platforms, attached to hashtags and stories that would soon make her the face of everything wrong with the airline industry. In her mind, she had simply followed procedure. In the world's eyes, she was about to become something else entirely. As she reached for the cockpit door, her tablet chimed with another message. More passengers were demanding answers about their connections, about the airline's status, about their futures. But the answers were no longer hers to give. Control had shifted, power had changed hands, and the old ways of doing things were ending at 35,000 feet. The plane began its gradual descent into Heathrow Airport, the late evening sun casting long shadows across the wing. Flight attendants moved through the cabin with practiced efficiency, collecting trash and ensuring tray tables were locked. The soft ding of the fasten seatbelt sign drew tired eyes upward. In first class, Rebecca stood in the galley, her perfectly manicured finger scrolling through her phone's social media feed. The color drained from her face as she came across a photo of herself, one taken earlier that day at JFK. In it, she stood next to Darius Cole, her hand extended toward coach class in a gesture that now seemed damning. The caption beneath the image read, "Flight Attendant Rebecca W., seen here removing Darius Cole from first class minutes before airline collapse." Her hands began to shake. She looked around the cabin, suddenly aware of passengers watching her. Some held their phones up, and she knew they were seeing the same image. The perfectly maintained facade she had worn for years began to crack. "Rebecca!" Another flight attendant touched her arm. "We need to prepare for landing." She nodded mechanically, but her eyes remained fixed on her phone as more notifications appeared. The story was spreading like wildfire across every platform. Her name was trending, but not in the way anyone would want. Back at airline headquarters, the PR team's offices had transformed into a war room. Screens displayed real-time social media analytics, each one showing devastating metrics. An intern's voice cut through the tense atmosphere. "Another dump just dropped." Internal screenshots began flooding news sites and social media platforms. The first was a group chat titled, "Gate Crew After Hours." The messages were damning. Flight attendants and gate agents sharing jokes about dressing down black passengers, complete with crying, laughing emojis. Each message carried a timestamp and username. Next came emails from the hiring department. Resumes of black job candidates had been circulated with mocking comments attached. "Another diversity hire trying to get in," read one. "Like we need more of those," responded another. The email chain included dozens of replies, each one worse than the last. But it was the video that broke the internet. Security footage from a flight simulator training session showed a black pilot trainee being openly mocked by instructors. "You really think you belong in that chair?" a voice could be heard saying. The trainee's face showed determination despite the harassment, but the laughter of the instructors echoed through the footage. Each piece of evidence was meticulously authenticated, digital signatures verified, timestamps confirmed. There would be no claiming these were fake or doctored. The truth had been preserved in the airline's own servers, waiting for this moment. Public opinion, which had started as mild interest in a technical glitch, transformed into outrage. Social media exploded with hashtags calling for boycotts. Corporate partners began issuing statements distancing themselves from the airline. Longtime customers posted videos of themselves cutting up their frequent flyer cards. In the main cabin of the descending aircraft, Lisa watched the unfolding story on her phone during a brief break. Years of suppressed emotions bubbled to the surface as she recognized names in the leaked messages. Colleagues she had smiled at, worked beside, trusted. She glanced toward Darius's seat, understanding now why he had remained so calm throughout the flight. The finance analyst sitting next to Darius leaned over slightly. "The stock's completely tanked," he whispered, showing Darius his screen. "They're saying the board might call for emergency measures." Darius simply nodded, his attention focused on the novel in his hands. The same quiet dignity that had marked his removal from first class remained unchanged, even as his carefully planned justice unfolded around him. In Manhattan, Stephen Clark's corner office felt smaller than ever. The floor-to-ceiling windows that usually offered commanding views of the city now seemed to mock him with their grandeur. His expensive shoes wore a path in the carpet as he paced back and forth, phone pressed to his ear. "What do you mean you can't stop it?" he barked into the phone. "These are our internal servers." The voice on the other end, belonging to the head of IT security, sounded defeated. "Sir, the system is operating exactly as designed. Coalworks built in these protocols with our approval. We never read the fine print." Stephen ended the call with a violent jab at his phone screen. His assistant entered quietly, holding a printed document with trembling hands. "Sir, the Times just published this." The article's headline stood out in bold black letters: "Systematic Discrimination Exposed. Inside the Toxic Culture of America's Leading Airline." The story detailed years of institutional racism, supported by thousands of documents, emails, and internal communications, all of it preserved by Coalworks' data management system. Stephen collapsed into his leather chair, the weight of his choices finally catching up to him. "We're finished," he muttered, more to himself than to his assistant. The words hung in the air like a funeral bell. The plane touched down at Heathrow with a gentle bump, its wheels meeting British soil just as the sun dipped below the horizon. Passengers began the usual routine of gathering belongings and checking phones, but there was an unusual tension in the air. Everyone had seen the news by now. Darius waited patiently for his row to clear, tucking his novel into his backpack. He moved through the aisle with unhurried steps, nodding politely to Lisa as he passed. Rebecca stood at the forward exit, her professional smile now brittle and forced. She avoided eye contact as Darius walked past. The jet bridge led him into Heathrow's Terminal 5, its modern architecture stretching above him in sweeping curves of steel and glass. As he walked through the corridor toward immigration, he passed a massive digital display mounted on the wall. The BBC News headline scrolled across the screen. "Airline CEO responds to discrimination scandal. Too late." Below the headline, footage played of Stephen Clark at an emergency press conference, his face drawn and pale as he faced a barrage of questions from reporters. The CEO's image flickered across the screen, a stark contrast to the calm figure of Darius Cole walking past, his gray hoodie and backpack making him look like any other traveler arriving in London on a weekday evening. The morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Shangri-La hotel suite at the Shard, casting long shadows across the luxurious space. Darius Cole stood in fresh clothes, a simple black sweater and dark jeans. watching London wake up beneath him. On the suite's wall-mounted smart screen, CNN International played continuous coverage of the airline crisis. In what analysts are calling the most sophisticated corporate takedown in modern history, the airline stock has plummeted to historic lows, the anchor reported. Behind her, graphs showed red lines diving off cliffs. Sources say the company's entire digital infrastructure remains under the control of Coalworks, a previously unknown tech consultancy. Hotel guests in the corridor outside whispered as they passed his door. In the elevator, a group of business travelers had stared at him, one nudging another and pointing discreetly at their phones, then back at him. The morning staff at the hotel's restaurant had nearly dropped a coffee pot when they realized who he was. Yet Darius maintained his characteristic calm, his face betraying no emotion as he observed the chaos he had orchestrated. The systematic discrimination exposed by these leaks goes beyond isolated incidents, a commentator on the screen explained. What we're seeing is years of documented bias, preserved in the company's own servers, now made public through what appears to be completely legal means. Back in Manhattan, morning traffic crawled past the airline's headquarters as board members arrived for an emergency session. The marble lobby, usually bustling with employees, stood eerily quiet. Security guards checked IDs with extra scrutiny, their faces tense with the knowledge that their jobs might not exist tomorrow. In the main boardroom, financial advisors and bankruptcy lawyers huddled around the massive oak table, their voices low and urgent. Stephen Clark sat at the head, his usual commanding presence deflated. Dark circles under his eyes suggested he hadn't slept. Anya stood near the room's floor-to-ceiling windows, her tablet displaying complex ownership diagrams. She had spent the night tracing a web of shell companies, each leading back to a central point. Her hands trembled slightly as she prepared to share what she'd found. "Before we discuss bankruptcy procedures," she began, her voice cutting through the murmured conversations, "there's something the board needs to know." She connected her tablet to the room's main display. A complex chart appeared on the screen, showing dozens of interconnected entities. "Over the past year, various investment vehicles have been quietly acquiring our stock," she explained, highlighting different nodes on the diagram. Cayman Island holdings, Swiss numbered accounts, Singapore investment firms, all seemingly unrelated. The board members leaned forward, their faces showing growing concern. "Together, these entities control 47% of voting shares," Anya continued. "And as of this morning, I've confirmed they all trace back to one beneficial owner." She paused, though everyone in the room already knew the name she was about to say. Darius Cole. The room erupted in shocked whispers. Stephen Clark's face turned an alarming shade of red. "That's impossible," he sputtered. "Our ownership is monitored. We have controls, Dash." "The purchases were all legal," Anya interrupted. "Made through properly registered entities, just discreet ones. The same way Coalworks was hidden in plain sight within our tech infrastructure." Miles away in Queens, Lisa Monroe stood in her small apartment kitchen, watching reporters gather outside her building through partially closed blinds. Her phone hadn't stopped buzzing since the story broke. Colleagues, friends, family. Everyone wanted to know what she had seen, what she knew. She thought about all the times she'd stayed quiet, all the incidents she'd witnessed but never reported. The weight of those silences felt heavier now than ever. Her teenage son watched from the couch, his face worried. "Mom, are you okay?" he asked. Before she could answer, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was an email notification. The sender read simply, "DC Private." Her hands shook slightly as she opened it. "When you're ready to speak, I'll be listening." D double quote. Lisa sat down heavily at her kitchen table, tears welling in her eyes. In that simple message, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years at the airline. Respect for her choice, her voice, her timing. Back in London, Darius stood at his hotel window, watching boats navigate the Thames below. The city stretched out before him, its ancient streets and modern skyscrapers coexisting in organized chaos. Behind him, the news continued its coverage, but he barely heard it now. His phone vibrated in his pocket. The message displayed was simple, but represented years of careful planning. "All directors have resigned. You are now controlling shareholder. Would you like to initiate asset acquisition? Darius looked at the 3 letters that would complete his long game. His finger hovered over them briefly, remembering that day in first class, remembering every slight, every dismissal, every moment of disrespect he'd encountered in his career. He pressed YES. In New York, the massive airline headquarters building stood against the morning sky. Floor by floor, the lights began to go out, like stars winking out of existence. The darkness crept up the building's face until only the top floor remained illuminated. Then, with a final flicker, that too went dark. The building stood silent, its windows reflecting the rising sun, while inside, decades of discriminatory culture came to an end, not with a bang, but with the quiet press of a button from across an ocean. The morning sun cast long shadows across JFK's Terminal 4, where hundreds of stranded passengers crowded around information desks. CNN crews positioned their cameras strategically, capturing the chaos as frustrated travelers waved their phones showing canceled flight notifications. A young reporter stood in front of the lens, her hair whipping in the cold New York wind. "We're entering day 2 of what people are calling the coal revolution," she reported, gesturing to the crowds behind her. All flights remain grounded across the airline's global network. Social media continues to explode with reactions, with hashtags like #DariusCole and #RespectMe trending in over 40 countries now. Inside the terminal, digital boards displayed row after row of red canceled notifications. A group of teenagers took selfies in front of them, adding captions with the trending hashtags. Their phones buzzed constantly with new social media notifications as the story continued to spread. "My daughter showed me the videos," an elderly woman told a BBC reporter near the check-in counter. "All those horrible messages they sent about black employees. Those interview rejections. It's disgusting. Good for Mr. Cole, I say. Good for him." Across Manhattan at the airline's former headquarters, the atmosphere was markedly different. The once bustling lobby sat nearly empty, save for security guards and a steady stream of employees carrying cardboard boxes of personal items. The company logo above the reception desk cast a shadow that seemed heavier than usual. On the executive floor, remaining legal and financial staff occupied the main conference room. Papers covered every surface: asset listings, transfer documents, employee records. The air felt thick with defeat and resignation. Janet Chen, the head of legal operations, stood by the window, watching more employees exit the building below. The elevator dinged, and a group of impeccably dressed lawyers entered. Their briefcases bore the logo of Cole International Legal Services. Unlike the scattered energy of the room's current occupants, they moved with practiced precision and calm authority. Marcus Thompson, the lead counsel for Cole International, placed his briefcase on the conference table and removed a single document. The room fell silent as he adjusted his glasses and began to read. "Per contractual agreement under Clause Delta, triggered by documented violations of ethical conduct standards," he stated, his voice clear and unwavering. "Full infrastructure, intellectual property, fleet facilities, and associated assets now legally transfer to Mr. Cole's ownership, effective immediately." A junior financial analyst in the corner began to cry softly. Others stared at their hands or phones, avoiding eye contact. Thompson continued reading, detailing the terms of transfer while his associates distributed thick envelopes to everyone present. "These contain your severance packages," a female associate explained, her tone professional but not unkind. "You'll find the terms are quite generous, significantly above industry standard." Generous. A middle-aged man in an expensive suit stood up, his face red. "He destroyed us. Thousands of jobs gone. And for what? Because one flight attendant?" "Sir," Thompson interrupted calmly, "the documentation released yesterday clearly shows systematic discrimination spanning 15 years. This was never about a single incident." In Queens, Lisa Monroe's apartment building had finally cleared of reporters. She stood at her kitchen window, watching the last news van pull away. Her phone still buzzed occasionally with messages from colleagues and journalists, but she'd stopped checking them hours ago. A soft knock at her door made her jump. She approached cautiously, checking the peephole. The hallway appeared empty, but a cream-colored envelope lay on her welcome mat. Lisa opened the door just enough to retrieve it, then quickly closed and locked it again. The envelope felt heavy, made of expensive paper. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it. Inside, she found a first-class ticket. The airline name caught her eye immediately: Aureus Air. Below it, on thick cardstock, a handwritten note read simply, "Don't stay grounded." Lisa sank into her couch, staring at the ticket. Her son came out of his room, noticed her expression. "Mom, what is it?" She showed him the ticket, and he whistled softly. "Aureus, that's Latin for golden, right? From Latin class?" Lisa nodded, still processing the implications of what she held in her hands. Meanwhile, in London, Darius Cole's hotel suite offered a panoramic view of the city, but his attention was focused on the wall-mounted screen where various news channels cycled through coverage of the airline's collapse. "He's a terrorist." Former CEO Stephen Clark appeared on screen, looking disheveled. "He infiltrated our systems, destroyed our company." "Your own documents destroyed your company," the interviewer corrected. "Mr. Cole simply made them visible." Another channel showed Rebecca, the flight attendant, being escorted through a crowd of reporters. "I was just doing my job," she shouted, pulling her coat over her face. Darius picked up the remote and turned off the screen. The suite fell silent except for the gentle clink of his teacup against its saucer as he took a careful sip of Earl Grey. Steam rose from the cup, curling in the morning light that streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows. He opened his laptop, fingers moving with practiced precision across the keyboard. A design program filled the screen, showing a sleek aircraft rendered in 3D. The fuselage gleamed in metallic black, accented with elegant gold striping. The tail fin bore a minimalist logo, a stylized golden wing against the black background. Below it, in clean modern typography, a UREUS. The design spoke of sophistication, of careful attention to detail, but more than that, it spoke of transformation, of something new rising from the ashes of the old. Darius studied it silently, his reflection in the window overlaying the London skyline beyond. The fluorescent lights hummed softly in the small conference room as Darius Cole adjusted his presentation materials one final time. 3 years ago, this moment had felt like his big break, a chance to revolutionize airline safety with his innovative AI system. The PowerPoint deck displayed crisp animations of his flight monitoring software, each slide meticulously prepared over countless late nights. Richard Bennett, the airline's vice president of operations, slouched in his leather chair, occasionally glancing at his phone. His expensive suit and carefully styled gray hair spoke of corporate success, but his demeanor radiated dismissive boredom. 2 other executives flanked him, their attention similarly divided. "The AI can predict maintenance issues before they become critical," Darius explained, his voice steady despite the growing knot in his stomach. "It analyzes thousands of data points in real time, from engine performance to weather patterns." Bennett raised an eyebrow, finally looking up from his phone. "Cost projection?" "Initial implementation would be $3 million, but the system pays for itself within 18 months through preventive maintenance savings alone." Darius clicked to the next slide, showing detailed ROI calculations. "And you developed this entirely yourself?" Bennett's tone carried a hint of disbelief. "Yes, sir. I've been working on the algorithms for the past 2 years, testing them against historical flight data." The presentation continued for another 15 minutes, Darius walking them through every feature, every safety enhancement, every cost-saving measure. His passion for the project showed in the precise way he explained complex concepts, making them accessible without dumbing them down. As he concluded, Bennett stood up, straightening his tie. "Nice work," he said, extending his hand. "But this kind of detail, our team can handle it." Darius shook the offered hand, maintaining his professional composure despite the sinking feeling in his chest. "Thank you for your time," he said, gathering his materials. As he reached the door, he heard Bennett speaking to one of his colleagues, not bothering to lower his voice. "He's sharp. Let's offshore it." The memory dissolved into the present day, where Martha Chen, Darius's lead counsel, stood in the airline's archive room. Boxes of documents surrounded her, their contents spread across a large table. Her assistant photographed each piece of evidence with methodical precision. "Look at this," Martha said, holding up a yellowed memo. "They didn't just steal his code, they systematically erased him from the project records." She placed the document under a bright desk lamp, pointing to a crossed-out name. "See? They replaced Darius Cole with David Collin throughout the documentation." Her team had uncovered dozens of similar alterations: internal memos, progress reports, even patent applications. The airline hadn't simply stolen Darius's work, they had attempted to rewrite history itself. Across town in the bustling newsroom of The Guardian, Zara Khalid put the finishing touches on her explosive article. Her desk was covered in printouts, sticky notes, and 3 empty coffee cups. The story had consumed her for weeks, each new piece of evidence fueling her determination to expose the truth. "CEO buried by lies, the theft of Darius Cole," read her headline. The article laid out a damning timeline. Emails showing executives discussing how to appropriate Darius's work, timestamps of altered documents, minutes from board meetings where his name was deliberately omitted, and statements from former employees who had witnessed the deception. "This isn't just about stolen code," Zara muttered to herself as she proofread the final draft. "It's about systematic erasure." Her fingers flew across the keyboard, adding final citations and cross-references. Every claim was backed by multiple sources, every accusation supported by documentary evidence. Meanwhile, in a sleek design studio in London, Darius sat with James Wong, his lead designer. Holographic displays surrounded them, showing various interior concepts for Aureus aircraft. The designs were revolutionary, a complete reimagining of the flying experience. James explained, gesturing to a demonstration. The AI greeting system recognizes returning passengers without racial bias. Facial recognition combined with multiple verification points ensures accuracy while eliminating historical discrimination patterns. Darius nodded, studying the interface. The crew avatars represented a diverse range of ethnicities, ages, and body types. The seating assignment algorithm had been specifically designed to prevent clustering based on demographic data. "What about the class divisions?" Darius asked, making notes on his tablet. James pulled up the cabin layout. "Traditional first, business, and economy?" Darius shook his head, typing quickly. "No class tiers. Experience, not hierarchy." He looked up at the design, and for the first time in days, a genuine smile crossed his face. The expression transformed his usually serious features, revealing the passion behind his measured exterior. "We're not just building another airline," he said, gesturing to the holographic cabin. "We're creating the future we should have had all along." The design team watched as their normally reserved boss continued making notes, his enthusiasm evident in every gesture. The smile remained, small but significant, a sign that after years of planning and waiting, something truly transformative was taking shape. James adjusted the display, and the new cabin concept materialized, a revolutionary layout that emphasized personal space and dignity for every passenger, regardless of ticket price. The traditional barriers between classes had been replaced with innovative pod designs that could be customized for different journey types. "It's perfect," Darius said, still smiling as he reviewed the final details. "This is exactly what we need." Rebecca Whitman sat in her home office, adjusting the lighting one final time before pressing record on her phone. She wore a crisp white blouse and had styled her hair carefully, projecting an image of professional composure. The script she'd prepared with her personal PR consultant lay just off camera. "I want to address the recent incident involving Mr. Cole," she began, her voice measured and rehearsed. "As a veteran flight attendant with over 15 years of experience, I've always prioritized following airline procedures to ensure passenger safety and comfort." She paused, glancing down briefly at her notes before continuing. "If my actions caused any distress, I want to acknowledge that this was not my intent. We face significant training gaps in our industry regarding diversity and inclusion. I was simply following the protocols as they were presented to me during my training." Her hands remained clasped tightly on the desk, knuckles white despite her attempted casual demeanor. "I hope we can use this as a learning opportunity to improve airline procedures and create better training programs for all staff members." The video went live on her social media accounts at precisely 9 a.m. EST. Within minutes, body language experts and social media analysts began breaking down every aspect of her performance. They noted her rigid posture, the lack of genuine remorse in her eyes, the careful way she avoided directly apologizing to Darius. "Classic non-apology apology," wrote one viral tweet. "Notice how she shifts blame to training gaps instead of taking responsibility for her actions." Another user posted a split-screen comparison. Rebecca's carefully composed video beside security footage of her dismissive behavior on the plane. The contrast was stark and damning. And "Not sorry" began trending within the hour, followed quickly by "just performative apology." Social media users dissected every frame, every word choice, every micro-expression. Video responses flooded in, with flight attendants of color sharing their own experiences of being forced to stay silent in similar situations. In a gleaming office building in Manhattan, Catherine Martinez, CEO of Elite PR Solutions, reviewed the final draft of a proposal. Her firm specialized in crisis management for Fortune 500 companies, and she saw an opportunity in the airline industry's current turmoil. "Mr. Cole," the proposal began, "Elite PR Solutions offers comprehensive reputation management strategies to contain and redirect negative media narratives. Our team has extensive experience in transforming corporate challenges into opportunities for positive brand evolution." The document detailed a 12-point plan for message control and narrative realignment. It promised to help position Darius as a reasonable businessman rather than an industry disruptor. The proposal landed on the desk of Marcus Chen, Darius's chief of staff. He read it once, snorted, and dropped it directly into the shredder. His response email was brief. "Mr. Cole does not require assistance in controlling his narrative. The truth speaks for itself." Meanwhile, in a quiet corner of a London cafe, morning light filtered through large windows, casting soft shadows across the wooden table where Darius sat waiting. The establishment was nearly empty, save for a barista arranging pastries and an elderly couple reading newspapers in the corner. The bell above the door chimed softly as Lisa Monroe entered. She wore casual clothes, jeans and a simple blazer, but carried herself with the same professional poise that years of airline service had ingrained. Her eyes scanned the cafe briefly before settling on Darius. He stood as she approached, gesturing to the chair across from him. 2 untouched cups of coffee sat on the table, steam rising gently into the cool air. "Thank you for coming," Darius said quietly, resuming his seat once she had settled into hers. Lisa wrapped her hands around her coffee cup, drawing comfort from its warmth. "I've been thinking about what to say to you," she began, her voice steady but soft. "About that day on the plane. About all the days before it." Darius remained silent, giving her space to continue. "I saw it happen so many times," she said, her eyes fixed on the swirling coffee. "Not just to passengers, to crew members too, to pilots in training. Every time I told myself I should speak up." She paused, taking a shallow breath. "But I knew what would happen if I did. Single mom, mortgage to pay, my son's college fund. I couldn't risk it." "You were never the problem," Darius replied, his voice gentle but firm. "The system was designed to make people like you feel powerless, to make silence feel like the only safe choice." Lisa looked up, meeting his gaze. "But I was still part of it. My silence made me complicit." "The past is a lesson, not a sentence," Darius said, reaching into his briefcase. "What matters now is what we do with that lesson." He withdrew a leather portfolio and placed it on the table between them. "You have something valuable that can't be taught, first-hand experience of what needs to change." He slid the portfolio toward her. "Now you get to be part of the solution." Lisa opened the portfolio with slightly trembling hands. Inside lay a contract, the Aureus Air logo embossed in gold at the top. Her eyes widened as she read the title, Chief Flight Culture Officer. "I don't understand," she whispered, staring at the document. "You understand exactly what needs to change," Darius replied. "You've lived it. Now you can help build something better." Through the cafe's window behind them, workers on cherry pickers were removing the old airline's signage from the Heathrow terminal building. Letter by letter, the company's name was being dismantled, each piece carefully lowered to the ground. Darius watched silently as the final letter teetered, then fell, leaving only clean space where the old name had been. The slate was clean, ready for something new to take its place. The website went live at exactly midnight GMT. Against a sleek black background, golden letters materialized one by one. "Welcome to Aureus, where bias can't board." Within minutes, screenshots flooded social media. Tech blogs scrambled to publish their analyses. Business reporters rushed to update their morning segments, fingers flying across keyboards as they raced to be the first with the story. The Verge's headline appeared first. Darius Cole's silent revenge becomes aviation's loudest wake-up call. The article detailed the technical brilliance behind his years-long strategy, the embedded kill switch, the legal framework carefully constructed through seemingly innocent contract clauses, the patient accumulation of voting shares through shell companies. Industry insiders marveled at the meticulous planning that had gone unnoticed for so long. TechCrunch followed with a deep dive into the system architecture, how Cole built an ethical kill switch into aviation's backbone. Their piece revealed how his original safety AI contained dormant protocols that could only be activated by documented evidence of discrimination. It wasn't a hack, it was a carefully designed ethical failsafe that the airline had unknowingly approved themselves. Cybersecurity experts called it brilliant in its simplicity and devastating in its effectiveness. "This isn't just disruption," wrote Sarah Chen in The Atlantic. "This is reconstruction." Cole didn't just break the system, he rebuilt it while everyone was distracted by the crash. Her thoughtful analysis traced how Cole had transformed a personal slight into an industry-changing revolution without ever raising his voice. The Wall Street Journal ran a front-page analysis titled, "The New Face of Ethical Capitalism." The piece explored how Cole had weaponized corporate America's own tools, contracts, clauses, stock manipulation, to force moral accountability. In an era where companies pledge diversity but resist change, the article noted, Cole created a mechanism that made ethics financially unavoidable. Business schools were already preparing case studies on his approach. CNBC's morning show featured a panel of aviation experts and tech analysts. "What we're seeing," said Dr. Marcus Webb, a business ethics professor, "is the emergence of moral clauses with real teeth." Cole didn't just make discrimination wrong, he made it expensive. The other panelists nodded in agreement, their expressions a mixture of admiration and unease. But as Aureus's launch gained momentum, the backlash began. Tucker Matthews, a popular right-wing commentator, devoted his primetime slot to what he called the war on merit in the skies. His studio lights seemed extra harsh as he leaned forward in his chair, jaw clenched with indignation. "What we're witnessing," Matthews declared, his face reddening as he jabbed his finger at the camera, "is nothing less than discrimination against the privileged. Cole isn't creating equality. He's engineering revenge." His viewers flooded social media with angry comments, many using language too offensive for network censors to catch. Similar sentiments echoed across conservative media. "Reverse racism takes flight," blared one headline. "Woke Airways, when social justice hijacks business," proclaimed another. Talk radio hosts spent hours dissecting every aspect of Aureus's policies, their voices growing hoarse with outrage. Amanda Porter, a controversial anchor known for her inflammatory takes, branded Aureus Activism Airlines during her evening broadcast. "This isn't progress," she sneered, her perfectly manicured nails drumming against her desk. "This is persecution of traditional values. What's next? Special treatment for everyone who claims discrimination." Her segment generated thousands of angry calls to Aureus's customer service line. The criticism reached its peak during Aureus's soft launch event at the newly rebranded terminal at JFK. Darius stood at the podium, his posture relaxed but alert, as he outlined the airline's innovative booking system, one that assigned seats based on practical factors like connection times and mobility needs, rather than ticket class or status. The audience of journalists and industry representatives listened with expressions ranging from fascination to barely concealed hostility. James Morrison, a journalist known for his aggressive questioning style, shot up from his seat during the Q&A. His face was flushed with barely contained anger as he thrust his microphone forward. Cameras swiveled to capture the confrontation everyone had been expecting. "Mr. Cole," Morrison's voice dripped with disdain, "isn't this all just an elaborate revenge scheme? You're punishing an entire industry over a personal grudge?" His question hung in the air like a challenge, the room suddenly electric with tension. The room fell silent. Camera shutters clicked rapidly. Darius remained still, his expression unchanged. When he spoke, his voice was measured and clear, cutting through the tension without raising its volume. "No," he replied, meeting Morrison's glare steadily. "I'm fixing it. You just don't like seeing someone like me with the wrench." His words were simple but landed with the precision of a master craftsman. The response exploded across social media within minutes. The wrench started trending globally. Memes appeared featuring Darius's face with various tools photoshopped in. Supporters began calling themselves mechanics of change. T-shirts with his quote appeared for sale online before the press conference had even concluded. That evening, in a modest apartment in Brooklyn, 7-year-old Amara Thompson sat cross-legged on the couch beside her mother, Maya. On their television screen, Aureus's first commercial played, a sweeping montage of diverse passengers being welcomed aboard with genuine warmth, their dignity intact, their humanity acknowledged. The soft lighting and gentle music created an atmosphere of inclusion that felt almost revolutionary. Amara leaned forward, her eyes wide with wonder as she watched flight attendants who looked like her mother moving through the cabin with confidence and pride. The golden Aureus logo shimmered against the night sky as the aircraft soared through clouds, leaving a trail that seemed to write a new promise across the heavens. "Mama," Amara tugged at her mother's sleeve, her small face alight with curiosity. "Can anyone fly with them?" Her innocent question contained all the hope and possibility that Darius had worked for. Maya pulled her daughter close, her throat tight with emotion as she watched the commercial that felt less like an advertisement and more like a promise. "Anyone who respects people, baby," she replied softly. "That's the ticket." She kissed the top of Amara's head, thinking about how different the world might be when her daughter grew up. Meanwhile, at the launch venue, Darius stood alone backstage, watching the same commercial play on the venue's monitors. The lights were dim, the space quiet except for the gentle hum of air conditioning and distant voices from the departing crowd. His reflection in a darkened window showed a man who had accomplished exactly what he set out to do, yet seemed surprised by the weight of the moment. As the final shots played across the screen, families reuniting, elderly passengers being assisted with genuine care, children of all backgrounds gazing out windows at the clouds, a single tear escaped down his cheek. He quickly wiped it away before anyone could see, straightened his jacket, and headed toward the exit where his team waited. His shoulders carried the weight of what he'd built, but his steps were lighter than they had been in years. 2 weeks after Aureus Air's public announcement, the transformation of airport terminals began in earnest. Construction crews worked through the night at major hubs: JFK, Heathrow, LAX, and Singapore Changi. The distinctive gold and black Aureus aesthetic emerged as old signage came down and new installations took shape. At Terminal 5 in Heathrow, workers installed sleek new check-in kiosks that bore no trace of traditional class distinctions. The machines featured clean lines and minimalist interfaces, with biometric scanners that processed passengers based on practical needs rather than status. No first class, no business class, no economy, just people traveling with dignity. The kiosks operated on an innovative system that Darius had personally overseen. Passengers were assigned seats based on an algorithm that considered factors like mobility requirements, connection times, and group travel needs. The system was blind to passenger names, deliberately anonymizing the process to eliminate conscious or unconscious bias. In a newly renovated training center at Heathrow, Lisa Monroe stood before Araeus's first class of flight attendants. The room hummed with energy as 20 diverse faces looked back at her, each wearing the signature black uniform with gold accents. The training space itself reflected Araeus's philosophy: open, inclusive, and technologically advanced. "Welcome to day one," Lisa began, her voice carrying a quiet confidence that hadn't been there during her previous airline career. "What we're building here isn't just a new airline. It's a new standard for how people should be treated in the sky." The training program she'd developed with Darius's team was unlike anything in commercial aviation. Traditional service protocols were replaced with modules on cultural competency, bias recognition, and de-escalation techniques. Each trainee wore advanced AR glasses that simulated challenging scenarios, allowing them to practice responses in real time. "Remember," Lisa explained as she initiated a simulation, "we don't just react to situations. We prevent them through awareness and preparation." The trainees watched as their AR displays created a virtual cabin environment. In the simulation, a white passenger in his 50s began questioning why a young black executive was seated in the premium section. The scenario unfolded with uncomfortable realism, testing the crew's ability to handle the situation professionally and definitively. The training session was being recorded as part of Araeus's commitment to transparency. Nobody expected what happened next. One of the trainees, Sarah Chen, handled the simulation with such grace and authority that the recording quickly found its way onto social media. In the viral clip, Sarah approached the simulated confrontation calmly. "Sir," she said to the challenging passenger, "at Araeus, we don't validate questions about who belongs where. Every passenger belongs exactly where they're seated. If you're uncomfortable with our policy of equal respect, I can help you arrange alternative travel options." The video spread rapidly across platforms, garnering millions of views within hours. The comment sections filled with praise for the direct yet professional approach. The clip ended with Araeus's new tagline appearing in elegant gold text: "We don't escalate, we elevate." Media coverage was immediate and extensive. Aviation blogs praised the practical approach to addressing in-flight discrimination. Social justice advocates celebrated the concrete action behind the words. Even traditional business publications had to acknowledge the innovative approach to customer service training. The success of the video and Araeus's growing public support attracted attention from unexpected quarters. In his London office, Darius began receiving a steady stream of offers from competing airlines. Each proposal was more generous than the last, all seeking to prevent Araeus from taking flight. Legacy carriers sent their top executives with carefully crafted pitches. One offered $3 billion for Araeus's technology and brand, with the condition that Cole sign an NDA and agree not to operate an airline. Another proposed a partnership that would allow them to share Araeus's ethical framework while maintaining their existing class structure. A particularly aggressive CEO arrived with a team of lawyers and a contract promising generous compensation in exchange for delaying Araeus's launch by 3 years. They called it a peace deal. Darius saw it for what it was, a bribe to maintain the status quo. He declined each offer without hesitation. To every proposal, his response remained consistent. Araeus isn't for sale. Change isn't negotiable. Late that night, after the last meeting and the final declined offer, Darius walked alone through Hangar 22 at Heathrow. The massive space was quiet except for the soft echo of his footsteps. In the center stood Araeus's first aircraft, a completely refitted A350 that gleamed in the dim lighting. The plane's exterior was a masterpiece of design. The fuselage was painted in deep, rich black that seemed to absorb light, while precise gold lines traced aerodynamic patterns along its length. The Araeus logo, a stylized golden wing, adorned the tail in illuminated splendor. Darius moved slowly around the aircraft, examining every detail. His hand trailed along the smooth surface of the landing gear, up across the engine housing, and finally came to rest on the nose of the plane. He stood there in silence, palm pressed against the cool metal, like a sculptor connecting with their creation. Behind him, footsteps approached. Marcus Chen, his lead engineer, walked up carrying a tablet with final inspection reports. The older man stopped a respectful distance away, observing his boss's moment of reflection. "All systems are green," Marcus said quietly. "Every test, every simulation, every safety protocol. Perfect scores across the board." He paused, then added with quiet pride, "We're ready for flight certification next week." Darius remained still, his hand on the aircraft's nose taking in the culmination of years of planning, pain, and purpose. Stephen Clark adjusted his tie and leaned into the microphone, a practiced smile plastered across his face. The podcast studio's red on-air light glowed steadily as he settled into what he hoped would be his redemption narrative. "Look, what happened to our airline wasn't about systemic issues," he said, his voice carrying the smooth confidence that had served him well in countless boardroom presentations. "This was a targeted attack by someone with an axe to grind, plain and simple." The podcast host, Brad Wheeler, nodded sympathetically. His show, Tech Titans Uncensored, had become a haven for controversial figures seeking to reshape their public image. "So, you're saying Darius Cole had a personal vendetta?" "Absolutely," Stephen replied, warming to his theme. "We're living in an age where one person with coding skills can destroy decades of business building just because their feelings got hurt. This cancel culture mentality is toxic to innovation." The interview continued for nearly 2 hours, with Stephen painting himself as the victim of what he called reverse discrimination and tech terrorism. He described Cole as a cyberbully with a vendetta who had manipulated public sentiment through social media manipulation. "What people don't understand," Stephen said, leaning forward intensely, "is that running an airline means making tough decisions. Not everyone gets to fly first class. Not everyone gets hired. That's not discrimination, that's business." The podcast quickly gained traction among certain online communities. Right-wing news sites picked up the story, running headlines like, "Canceled CEO Speaks Out, The Dark Truth Behind Woke Airlines," and "Tech Terrorist or Social Justice Warrior? The Real Darius Cole Story." Stephen's social media followers grew as he retweeted supportive messages and shared clips from the interview. For a brief moment, it seemed his strategy might work. Then Zara Khalid published her article. The piece appeared first on her Substack, then was quickly picked up by major news outlets. The headline was devastating in its simplicity. "The Truth You Buried: How Stephen Clark Ignored 27 Reports of Racial Discrimination in 4 Years." Zara's investigation was meticulous. She had obtained internal emails, HR reports, and testimony from former employees at every level of the organization. The article began with a simple timeline. March 2019, Black pilot trainee reports being called racial slurs during simulator training. Status: investigation inconclusive. July 2019, 3 flight attendants filed joint complaint about discriminatory scheduling. Status: no action required. September 2019, first-class passenger files formal complaint after being repeatedly asked to show boarding pass. Status: customer misunderstanding. The list continued, each entry more damning than the last. Zara had interviewed former HR employees who described a systematic process of burying discrimination complaints. One former HR director, speaking anonymously, revealed how reports were deliberately miscategorized to avoid triggering external audits. "We were told to mark racial incidents as customer service issues or procedural misunderstandings," the source explained. Any mention of race or discrimination had to be scrubbed from the final reports. Flight attendants came forward with screenshots of group chats where supervisors openly mocked passengers of color. Pilots shared stories of being passed over for promotion despite perfect performance records. Even passengers contributed evidence. Years of social media posts, formal complaints, and video recordings that had been ignored or dismissed. Most damaging were the emails. Zara had obtained messages from Stephen Clark's own account, showing his direct involvement in suppressing discrimination reports. In one exchange, he wrote to his head of PR, "These people need to understand. This is our airline. They fly by our rules or not at all." The article was a masterclass in investigative journalism. Each claim was backed by multiple sources. Every accusation was supported with documentation. Stephen's podcast interview was systematically dismantled, point by point, with hard evidence. Within hours of publication, Darius's legal team sent a formal cease and desist notice to the podcast platform. But it wasn't what anyone expected. Instead of claiming defamation or requesting removal of the episode, the notice cited violations of cybercrime reporting ethics. The letter pointed out that by allowing Stephen to characterize Cole's legal system override as cyber terrorism, the platform had violated its own terms of service regarding the responsible reporting of cyber incidents. The contract Cole's company had signed with the airline explicitly included system control provisions, making any characterization of the takeover as hacking both legally incorrect and potentially libelous. The podcast platform's legal team reviewed the notice and quickly reached their conclusion. Within 24 hours, Stephen's episode was quietly removed from all platforms. A brief statement cited technical and legal compliance issues as the reason. The fallout was swift. Stephen had been in talks to launch a new aviation consulting firm, but investors began pulling out. One venture capital firm issued a terse statement. After review of recent developments, we have decided to pursue other opportunities. His speaking engagements were canceled. His LinkedIn connections dropped by thousands. Former colleagues stopped returning his calls. The narrative he had tried to construct crumbled under the weight of evidence. Meanwhile, in a sleek conference room in London, Darius sat through a routine staff briefing about market responses to Aureus Air's upcoming launch. As his team discussed metrics and projections, someone mentioned Stephen's failed attempt at reputation rehabilitation. Darius didn't look up from his notepad. He simply circled one word in his notes: irrelevant. The past was burning behind him, and he had no interest in watching the flames. His focus remained fixed on the future he was building, not the system he had dismantled. The morning sun painted streaks of gold across the private airfield outside London. A light mist hung in the air, creating halos around the runway lights that guided the way to something unprecedented. 3 Aureus Air aircraft stood in perfect formation, their sleek black and gold livery catching the dawn light like modern sculptures. Journalists huddled in small groups, checking equipment and comparing notes. Tech investors in tailored suits stood apart from the crowd, their attention divided between the aircraft and their phones as they monitored market reactions. Aviation authority representatives maintained their professional distance, clipboards at the ready. Among the gathered crowd were faces both familiar and new. Former airline employees who had jumped ship to join Aureus stood proudly in their new uniforms. Black suits with subtle gold accents, designed for comfort and dignity rather than show. The atmosphere crackled with anticipation, but it wasn't the usual excitement of a corporate launch. This felt more like the quiet before a revolution. Lisa Monroe stepped onto the temporary stage, her new position as Chief Flight Culture Officer evident in her bearing. Gone was the hesitation that had once held her back. She adjusted the microphone and looked out at the assembled crowd, her eyes bright with purpose. "When I started in aviation 20 years ago," she began, her voice clear and steady, "I thought my job was to serve drinks and smile. What I didn't realize was that I was also serving a system that didn't serve everyone equally." The crowd grew still, hanging on her words. I watched passengers being profiled. I saw colleagues passed over for promotions. I heard the whispers and jokes that weren't really jokes. Her voice caught slightly. And I stayed quiet, because that's what we were taught to do. Lisa paused, wiping a tear that had escaped despite her composure. The silence in the audience deepened, respectful and understanding. "But staying quiet doesn't keep you safe," she continued, her voice growing stronger. "It just makes you complicit. At Aureus, we're not just launching a new airline. We're launching a new standard, one where dignity isn't a premium service, it's the only service we offer." She went on to outline the technological and cultural innovations that would define Aureus. The bias-proof seating algorithms, the anonymous check-in systems, the comprehensive staff training in cultural competency and conflict resolution. Each point was met with nods of approval from the aviation authorities and thoughtful note-taking from the journalists. When Lisa finished, the applause was genuine if subdued. This wasn't a moment for celebration. It was a moment for reflection and commitment. Darius Cole approached the podium next. He wore a simple black suit with no tie, his usual understated style making him seem more architect than CEO. The murmuring in the crowd died down completely as he took his position. "Many people have asked me if this is about revenge," he said, his voice carrying naturally across the field. "If I built Aureus to punish those who wronged me." He paused, letting the question hang in the air. The answer is no. This isn't revenge. It's repair. The words landed with quiet force. Several journalists straightened in their seats. "We're not here to tear down the old system," Darius continued. "That system tore itself down through years of conscious choices to exclude, to discriminate, to maintain hierarchies that should have died decades ago." His eyes swept across the crowd. "We're here to build something new, something that should have existed all along." The applause that followed wasn't thunderous or prolonged. It was the kind of applause that comes from understanding rather than excitement, meaningful rather than performative. As the ceremony transitioned to boarding, the first passengers began making their way to the lead aircraft. The passenger list was notably diverse, but what stood out most was how unremarkable the boarding process felt. There were no priority lanes, no elite status announcements, no subtle segregation of services. The algorithm had assigned seats randomly, creating natural integration throughout the cabin. Darius stood at the gate, observing the boarding process with quiet attention. He watched as business people in suits sat next to families with children, as elderly passengers were assisted with equal care regardless of their ticket price, as every boarding pass was checked with the same respectful efficiency. A mother and daughter approached the gate, the little girl's eyes wide as she took in the gleaming aircraft beyond the window. She was about 8 years old, wearing a bright yellow dress that seemed to match the morning sun. As they reached Darius, the girl stopped suddenly, recognition dawning on her face. "Did you build this?" she asked, looking up at him with unfiltered curiosity. Darius knelt down to meet her eye level, a genuine smile softening his usually serious expression. "I helped," he said gently, "but it's yours now." The mother squeezed her daughter's hand, tears visible in her eyes as she nodded thanks to Darius. They continued down the jet bridge, joining the steady stream of passengers entering the aircraft. The boarding process continued smoothly until the final passenger was seated. The cabin crew performed their checks with practiced precision. Ground staff cleared the area. The jet bridge withdrew. As the aircraft doors closed with a definitive thunk, a subtle shift seemed to pass through the watching crowd. They were witnessing more than a first flight. They were watching the birth of a new paradigm in air travel. The engines hummed to life, their sound muffled by next-generation noise reduction technology. The aircraft began to taxi, its gold and black livery catching the morning light one final time before it turned onto the runway. The world's first bias-proof airline was about to take flight. 3 days after Aureus Air's historic first flight, the morning calm at Heathrow Terminal 2 was shattered by raised voices. Maxwell Bradford, a platinum-status frequent flyer with multiple airlines and nearly 1 million social media followers, stood at the Aureus check-in counter, his face reddening with each passing moment. "Do you know who I am?" he demanded, waving his phone at the gate agent, a young woman named Sarah who maintained her professional composure. "I've flown over 2 million miles. I always get priority seating." Sarah smiled politely, her training evident in her measured response. "Sir, as I explained, Aureus Air doesn't offer priority seating or status-based upgrades. Our seating algorithm ensures fair distribution for all passengers." Maxwell's expensive leather briefcase hit the counter with a thud. "Fare. I paid full fare. I demand to speak to a supervisor." He pulled out several 100-pound notes, sliding them across the counter with practiced discretion. "Surely we can work something out?" Sarah didn't even glance at the money. "I apologize, sir, but that would violate our core policies. Every passenger receives equal treatment regardless of status or attempts at influence." The terminal's morning bustle quieted as Maxwell's voice rose another octave. He held his phone up, recording now. "This is discrimination. You're targeting me because I'm white, aren't you? Because I'm successful?" Other passengers began to film the interaction. A small crowd gathered, some muttering disapprovingly at Maxwell's behavior, others nodding in apparent sympathy. Sarah remained calm, her hands folded in front of her. "Sir, if you'd like to board according to our standard procedure, we welcome you. If not, we can assist you in booking with another carrier." "Oh, I'll board," Maxwell sneered, still recording. "And everyone will see how this equal airline treats its premium customers." As he stormed toward the gate, his expensive shoes clicking against the terminal floor, he nearly collided with an elderly woman in a wheelchair being assisted by her daughter. Instead of apologizing, he muttered something about special treatment and pushed past them. Within hours, Maxwell's edited version of events appeared online. The carefully curated clips showed only the denial of his seating request, with captions about reverse discrimination and anti-success bias. The #sign bias in reverse began trending, particularly among certain demographic groups who had been skeptical of Aureus's mission from the start. In Aureus's London headquarters, the PR team scrambled to prepare statements. Crisis management experts were called. Legal advisors reviewed possible responses. Everyone wanted Darius to make a statement, to defend the airline's policies, to engage in the public debate. But Darius sat in his office calm as ever, reviewing footage from the aircraft's advanced camera system. He typed a brief message to Lisa. "Show them the truth. Full context. No commentary needed." Lisa understood immediately. Within the hour, she posted a simple 30-second clip from the terminal's security feeds. The unedited footage told a different story. It showed Maxwell attempting to bribe the gate agent. It captured his sneering comments about other passengers. Most damning of all, it clearly displayed his behavior toward the elderly disabled passenger and her daughter, including his clearly audible remark, "Some people shouldn't fly if they can't walk to their own seats." The public response was swift and decisive. The same social media channels that had amplified Maxwell's complaint now turned against him. His carefully constructed image as a sophisticated business traveler crumbled in the face of raw evidence. Commentators who had initially supported him quietly deleted their posts. Lisa's caption under the video was elegant in its simplicity. "Your seat didn't define you. You did." Maxwell's social media accounts disappeared within hours. His business partners began distancing themselves. Several companies he consulted for issued statements reviewing their relationship with him. The incident became a case study in Aureus's training materials: how to handle confrontation with dignity, how to maintain professionalism under pressure, and how transparency could be the best defense against false narratives. That evening, as the sun set over London, Darius sat in his office reviewing the day's events. The wall-mounted screens displayed news coverage of the incident, most of it now praising Aureus's handling of the situation. The airline's stock had actually risen, with analysts citing strong ethical governance as a positive indicator. A soft knock at the door preceded his assistant Maya, entering with the day's final mail delivery. "Just one more thing requiring your attention," she said, placing a sealed envelope on his desk. The envelope bore no return address or identifying marks. Darius opened it carefully. Inside was a photograph that made his breath catch slightly, himself from 10 years ago, standing in the old airline's lobby. He looked different then. Younger, yes, but also somehow smaller, less certain. His clothes were cheaper, his posture less confident. He was clutching a portfolio containing his original flight safety AI proposal, the one that would be stolen and rebranded. But it was the handwritten note accompanying the photo that truly caught his attention. "You didn't just change the airline, you changed the altitude for all of us." The simple message carried the weight of understanding, of recognition for what Aureus truly represented. It wasn't just about fair seating or equal treatment. It was about raising standards for everyone, about proving that dignity could be profitable, that respect could be systematic. Darius folded both the photo and the note carefully. Opening his desk drawer, he placed them in a folder labeled simply, "Legacy." The drawer contained other mementos: the original contract with its hidden clause, the first Aureus concept sketch, Lisa's acceptance letter as Chief Flight Culture Officer. 1 month after Aureus Air's inaugural flight, the aviation industry found itself grappling with a new reality. The airline's success wasn't just evident in its profit margins, it showed in the countless social media posts, blog reviews, and passenger testimonials flooding the internet. Travelers shared selfies with Aureus's diverse crew members, their smiles genuine and relaxed. The photos weren't staged PR shots, they captured authentic moments of connection. A black executive posted about boarding without the usual tension in his shoulders. An elderly Asian couple wrote about how the crew helped them without a hint of condescension. A Muslim family celebrated making their entire journey without a single suspicious glance. The check-in process, once a source of stress and status anxiety, had become remarkably peaceful. Without the usual jostling for upgrades or priority treatment, passengers moved through terminals with unprecedented ease. The algorithm-based seating system eliminated the subtle biases that had plagued aviation for decades. In the Aureus headquarters, Lisa sat in her office reviewing the month's incident reports, or rather, the lack thereof. 0 bias complaints, 0 discrimination incidents, 0 escalations based on race, religion, or appearance. The numbers told a story that the industry had claimed impossible. Air travel without prejudice was not only achievable, but profitable. When the invitation from the International Aviation Summit in Zurich arrived, Darius's initial response was a polite decline. He had never sought the spotlight, preferring to let his systems and results speak for themselves. The summit organizers persisted, offering him the keynote slot, but still he hesitated. It was Lisa who finally changed his mind. She found him in his office late one evening, staring at the invitation. "You should go," she said, settling into one of the chairs across from his desk. Darius glanced up. "They don't need me there, the numbers speak for themselves." "Numbers don't change minds, Darius. Stories do." Lisa leaned forward, her expression earnest. "If you don't define the standard, someone else will. And they'll get it wrong." He studied her face for a long moment, recognizing the wisdom in her words. Finally, he nodded. "Book the flight." The summit venue in Zurich was packed with aviation's elite, CEOs in expensive suits, regulators with decades of experience, industry leaders who had shaped air travel for generations. They filled the auditorium, many skeptical, others curious, all wondering what this quiet revolutionary would say. Darius took the stage without fanfare. No presentation slides brightened the screen behind him. No papers rustled in his hands. He wore a simple black suit, his presence commanding despite, or perhaps because of, its understated nature. "Respect me was the rule," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the hall. "Now, it's the standard." The audience stirred, some uncomfortable with the directness of his words. "For decades, we've treated discrimination as a flaw in the system," he continued. "A bug to be patched, a PR crisis to be managed, but that was never true." He paused, letting the silence build tension. Discrimination wasn't a flaw in the old system. It was the architecture. He paced slowly across the stage, his words measured and precise. "We built hierarchies and called them classes. We created barriers and called them privileges. We institutionalized bias and called it business." The discomfort in the room was palpable now. Several CEOs shifted in their seats. "Aureus doesn't offer a new way to fly," Darius said. "It offers the only way to fly, with dignity, with respect, with equality hard-coded into every interaction." His eyes swept the audience. "I challenge each of you to audit yourselves, not for publicity, not for profit, but for the passengers who trust you with their safety, their comfort, and their dignity." When he finished speaking, the applause was scattered at first, then grew stronger. Some remained seated, their expressions tight with resistance. Others stood, recognition dawning in their eyes. The aftermath was immediate. Airline's representatives swarmed Aureus's booth at the summit, armed with partnership proposals and licensing requests. They wanted the technology, the policies, the training programs, anything that could help them catch up to this new standard. Darius's legal team handled each approach with professional courtesy and firm rejection. To one particularly persistent CEO who offered a blank check, the lead counsel simply said, "This wasn't built to be copied. It was built to be earned." That evening, Darius sat at a quiet cafe near Lake Zurich with Lisa and Zara Khalid. The day's tension had melted away, replaced by comfortable camaraderie. They shared a plate of pastries and sipped rich Swiss coffee, their laughter genuine and relaxed. A television mounted on the cafe wall played a commercial for one of the major airlines. The ad showed diverse passengers being treated with exaggerated courtesy, while a voiceover promised a new commitment to fighting bias in the skies. Darius raised an eyebrow at the screen, his expression somewhere between amusement and skepticism. Lisa caught his look and smirked. "We knew they'd try," she said, stirring her coffee. "But they're still flying in your shadow." 6 months passed like clouds drifting across an endless sky. In a modest neighborhood where dreams took root in concrete gardens, young Imani walked home from school, her backpack bouncing with each step. The afternoon sun caught the small golden pin on her bag, an Aureus air pilot's wings that she polished every morning before leaving for class. The pin had become her treasure, a symbol of possibility that made her stand a little taller among her classmates. Some days, she'd trace its outline with her finger during math class, imagining herself in the cockpit of one of those gleaming black and gold planes. She'd close her eyes for just a moment and picture herself soaring above the clouds, hands steady on the controls, the world spread out beneath her. As she climbed the stairs to her apartment, the familiar sounds of the evening news drifted through the door. Her mother sat on their well-worn couch, attention fixed on the television screen. The news anchor's voice filled their small living room. Breaking news in the aviation industry today. Darius Cole, the founder and CEO of Aureus Air, has announced his resignation. The company released a statement moments ago, quoting Cole as saying, "The work was never about me, it was about us." Imani's mother leaned forward, shaking her head in quiet amazement. The screen showed footage of Aureus planes taking off and landing, their distinctive livery now a familiar sight in skies around the world. The reporter continued with details about the company's unprecedented growth and customer satisfaction ratings that had shattered industry records. Miles away in a peaceful coastal town where the sea met the sky, Darius Cole walked a wind-swept path along the cliffs. Gone was the careful suit, the pristine appearance that had become his armor in boardrooms and press conferences. Instead, he wore comfortable jeans and a simple sweater, his pace unhurried, his shoulders relaxed for perhaps the first time in years. The path wound through patches of wild grass and coastal flowers, the ocean's rhythm providing a constant soundtrack to his thoughts. Local residents passed by with casual nods or quiet hellos, none recognizing him as the man who had transformed air travel. Some walked dogs, others jogged, all going about their lives without the weight of history on their shoulders. That weight now rested comfortably on Lisa Monroe's capable shoulders. In Aureus's headquarters, she settled into the CEO's office with the same grace and determination that had carried her through decades in the sky. Her first major policy announcement sent ripples through the corporate world. Ground Day. The initiative required every executive, from department heads to board members, to spend one full day each month in coach class. Not observing, not evaluating, but sitting, listening, and learning. They would experience flights exactly as regular passengers did, with no special treatment or recognition. They would eat the same meals, use the same bathrooms, and navigate the same challenges as everyone else. "We don't just serve our passengers," Lisa explained to her team. "We learn from them, we fly with them, we understand them. Only then can we truly build an airline that works for everyone." The policy exemplified everything Aureus stood for. Equality wasn't just a marketing slogan. It was built into every decision, every interaction, every flight. Other airlines scrambled to copy the initiative, but passengers could feel the difference between genuine commitment and corporate imitation. Zara Khalid, who had documented Aureus's rise from its dramatic beginnings, put the finishing touches on what she considered her masterpiece. Her article, Altitude: How One Quiet Man Changed the Skies Forever, wasn't just about Darius Cole or Aureus Air. It was about transformation, how change could come not from loud proclamations or flashy promises, but from quiet determination and unwavering principle. Her phone buzzed constantly with interview requests from major networks, but she declined them all. The story spoke for itself. As the story spread across news outlets and social media, Imani and her mother prepared for their first Aureus flight. They had saved for months, planning a dream trip to Paris. The morning of their departure, Imani clutched her backpack close, the pilot pin catching the early light as she stood nervously in front of the mirror. The Aureus terminal felt different from any airport space they'd been in before. The usual stress and hierarchy were absent, replaced by a calm efficiency that welcomed everyone equally. No velvet ropes separated first class from economy passengers. No hidden lounges created invisible barriers between travelers. As they approached their gate, Imani's eyes widened at the sleek black and gold aircraft waiting outside. When they stepped aboard, a warm, natural-sounding AI voice greeted them. "Welcome aboard, Imani. Seat 14, A. The skies are yours." The little girl beamed, feeling like the plane had been waiting just for her. Her mother squeezed her hand, fighting back tears at the simple dignity of the moment. For the first time in her life as a traveler, she felt truly valued. Far from the airport's buzz, Darius stood on his cliff watching the horizon. A golden streak caught his eye, an Aureus jet crossing the vast blue canvas of sky, its contrails painting white brushstrokes against the heavens. He didn't need to be in a boardroom or behind a desk to know his work had succeeded. The proof was in every peaceful flight, every dignified welcome, every barrier broken. The plane continued its journey across the horizon, carrying dreams like Imani's to new heights, while below, the architect of this change stood content in his silence, finally at peace with the altitude he'd helped others reach. He smiled, took a deep breath of salt air, and continued his walk, just another man enjoying the beauty of an ordinary day. If you enjoyed the story of Darius, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it. If you enjoyed the story of Darius, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.